Brothers and sisters of Africa, the truth cannot stay buried any longer. A storm is rising in the heart of Burkina Faso. For weeks, reports have emerged of armed groups slipping across the southern border, carrying weapons and money from unknown hands. At first, the government stayed silent, hoping for cooperation and peace. But now, the silence has broken. In a historic address to his people, Ibrahim Traoré has called out Côte d'Ivoire by name. He claims Burkina Faso's neighbors, once friends, have secretly given safe haven to rebels who seek to destabilize his country. He says foreign hands are funding these groups through a network of Western agents and local politicians who have sold their loyalty for profit. The evidence is mounting. Intercepted calls, night convoys, weapons found with markings that lead back to European manufacturers. Burkina Faso's security forces call it a shadow war, a silent invasion masked as border instability. But this time, the nation refuses to play victim. Traoré's message to Africa is clear. The era of betrayal is over. He says no foreign government, no neighbor, and no corporation will ever decide Burkina Faso's destiny again. Across the continent, his words have ignited a movement. From Bamako to Conakry, young Africans are sharing his speech, chanting the same message. Africa will not bow. In every corner of the continent, people are asking the same question: who truly benefits when Africans fight each other? Côte d'Ivoire has issued a formal denial. Its foreign ministry calls the accusations baseless. But on the ground, Burkinabe officials insist the evidence is too strong to ignore. They claim foreign intelligence agents, expelled from Burkina Faso months ago, have moved operations to neighboring countries, training local forces while secretly arming rebel cells. This pattern is not new. For decades, Africa has been used as a chessboard for foreign powers. When one nation rises, another is pushed down. But now, a new generation is refusing to play the game. Traoré's words are not just for Burkina Faso. They are for every African nation that has suffered under the weight of external control and internal betrayal. He warns that if any leader chooses to protect those who kill Africans, that leader has chosen to stand with the enemy. It is no longer a battle between countries. It is a battle between truth and corruption, between courage and cowardice. The streets of Ouagadougou are alive with energy. Flags wave, music plays, and voices rise in unity. For the first time in years, Burkinabe youth believe their country is writing its own story, not the story written for them by colonial masters or foreign media. Outside Africa, the reaction is swift. European outlets call Traoré reckless. American analysts label him a dangerous populist. But inside Africa, he is becoming a symbol of unapologetic freedom. This speech has sent shockwaves through the continent. Some leaders watch quietly, fearing the same awakening in their own people. Others stand in solidarity, silently acknowledging that Traoré has spoken what they dare not say. Burkina Faso now prepares for what comes next. Troops are being repositioned. Intelligence units are tracking suspicious movements along the border, and in the streets, posters read, "We don't want war, we want respect." The battle for Africa's future is no longer fought only with guns. It is fought with truth, unity, and the refusal to be divided. And Traoré's voice, fueled by the anger of a generation, has become the spark that is setting the continent on fire. The speech may have lasted only minutes, but its echo was heard across the entire continent. For the first time, a leader had dared to name the source of the chaos, not the faceless terror groups, but the systems and states that feed them for profit. The crowd outside the presidential palace in Ouagadougou erupted in thunderous chants. Men, women, and children all repeating one name, Traoré, Traoré. Not as a politician, not as a general, but as a symbol of defiance against an entire network that has long kept Africa divided. As his words spread through social media, journalists and analysts scrambled to understand what was happening. Was this merely political theater, or the beginning of a new geopolitical chapter for West Africa. In a statement that followed, the Burkina Faso government released what they called preliminary evidence. Documents, satellite images, and captured communications pointed toward movements near the border shared with Côte d'Ivoire. Unmarked vehicles crossing at night, camps set up deep in forested regions. Traoré's message was simple: we know who funds them, we know where they hide, and we will not stay silent. The West called it propaganda, but for many Africans, it was truth spoken aloud for the first time. In Mali, street interviews revealed a new sense of unity. People compared the Burkina Faso president to the anti-colonial heroes of the past, to Sankara, Lumumba, and Nkrumah, men who challenged Western influence at its core. In Ghana and Senegal, youth movements started echoing his words: no African country should host an enemy of another African country. But while the people celebrated, others began to panic. Foreign mining companies, many with ties to French and American investors, started withdrawing staff. Contracts were suddenly under review. The markets reacted. And yet, Burkina Faso's government stood firm, even as international media labeled it unstable. Behind the scenes, Traoré's advisors were working around the clock. The intelligence community compiled lists of rebel movements, foreign NGOs, and suspicious funding pipelines. Some disguised as humanitarian projects, others hidden behind trade deals. Every discovery pointed to one thing: Africa's so-called allies were still controlling the game. In one shocking revelation, a leaked document allegedly showed a private security company, linked to a European state, transferring funds to a militia operating on Burkina Faso's southern frontier. This, Traoré said, was the modern face of colonialism, not armies with flags but companies with logos. Meanwhile, Côte d'Ivoire's government issued another press release, denying all accusations. They described Burkina Faso's claims as dangerous rhetoric. But on African streets, few believed the denial. For too long, nations had watched rebels move freely across borders, always well-armed, always well-funded, yet no one ever knew who paid them. Now someone had dared to speak. Burkina Faso's national television aired investigative reports showing confiscated weapons, marked with European serial numbers. The footage went viral, not just in West Africa but globally. Millions of views poured in from the diaspora, Africans living in Europe and America, sharing the videos with a single message: wake up. Western diplomats called for calm. But calm is difficult to preach to a nation that has suffered years of instability and foreign interference. Burkina Faso's people have buried too many of their sons. They have watched too many promises of aid turn into new forms of control. Now with Traoré's leadership, the narrative has changed. This is no longer a country begging for support. It is a country demanding respect. And as the tension rose, so did the hope. In one viral clip, a young Burkina Faso soldier said on camera, "We're not fighting just for Burkina. We're fighting for every African child who wants to grow up free." His words spread like wildfire across TikTok and YouTube. Thousands of Africans began referring to Burkina Faso as the heart of resistance. At the African Union, debates heated up. Some leaders expressed concern that Traoré's speech could destabilize regional diplomacy. But others quietly, privately applauded his courage. They too had seen the pattern. They too knew how foreign interests were playing one African nation against another, keeping them weak through endless divisions. In response to rising public pressure, several African leaders called for an emergency meeting, not in Paris, not in Washington, but in Bamako. It was the first time in modern history that African nations gathered without foreign observers to discuss their own regional security. Traoré's vision of an African-led defense alliance was beginning to take shape. Meanwhile, Western media doubled down on their coverage. Articles appeared with headlines like Burkina Faso's dangerous turn and the new anti-West movement in Africa. Analysts accused Traoré of turning his country into a pawn of anti-Western forces. But on the streets of Ouagadougou, the people had a different name for it: freedom. Women marched with banners reading, "We choose dignity over dollars." University students painted murals of Sankara and Traoré side by side, with the words "Africa Rising" written underneath. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. For decades, Africa's youth had been told to wait for jobs, wait for change, wait for freedom. Now they were done waiting. What began as one leader's accusation was turning into a continental movement. Traoré's message was echoing beyond borders in Niger, Mali, Guinea, and even as far as the Congo. Each speech, each action, each confrontation with foreign powers, it all added to the fire that was now spreading across Africa. And as this new unity grew, one question began to haunt the halls of power in the West. What happens if Africa stops listening? If the continent no longer fears the dollar, no longer depends on Western aid, and no longer allows its neighbors to be turned against each other? Then the entire foundation of modern geopolitics begins to shake. Burkina Faso has become the spark of something greater. A revolution not fought with bullets, but with truth. And Traoré, standing at its center, knows exactly what is at stake. The night after the accusation, the city of Ouagadougou did not sleep. Helicopters circled above the palace. Soldiers guarded the borders. The air was thick with uncertainty, not fear but anticipation. Everyone knew the world was watching. Inside the presidential office, light flickered over stacks of papers, field reports, intercepted calls, classified maps. Traoré leaned over the desk, his face half-lit, half-shadow. He was not a man drunk with power. He was a soldier weighed down by history. He knew what happened to African leaders who spoke too much truth. But he also knew silence was a greater death. The next morning, a new message hit the airwaves. It wasn't a speech from a podium. It was a direct broadcast from the military headquarters. A short clip, simple, raw, real. No background music, no polished edits. Just one man, looking straight into the camera. Brothers and sisters, the hour has come. We will not let those who sell our pain dictate our future. We will not kneel before those who divide us and call it peace. We will stand, even if we stand alone. Within hours, the clip went viral. Millions of Africans across the continent reposted it with a single hashtag, Africa for Africans. The algorithm had no choice but to push it. It flooded YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. For once, the narrative wasn't controlled by Western newsrooms. It was driven by the people themselves. Meanwhile in Abidjan, panic brewed quietly. Côte d'Ivoire's intelligence agencies scrambled to contain the fallout. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Foreign diplomats whispered in corridors, trying to decide whether to confront or to ignore. But the truth was already out. Leaked satellite imagery began circulating on Twitter. The images showed convoys of unmarked trucks leaving rebel-controlled areas near the border, heading west. The same vehicles Traoré had referenced in his speech. For many Africans, this was confirmation. Burkina Faso's government doubled down. It announced the creation of a new national sovereignty task force, a specialized intelligence and border defense command, independent of foreign oversight. The message was clear: Africa will protect itself. This was no longer just a diplomatic spat. It was the first act of a geopolitical realignment. International news outlets called it reckless, but the people called it revolutionary. Inside villages near the border, young men volunteered to join the defense forces. Fathers brought their sons to recruitment centers, saying, Fight for the soil that raised you. Women organized food drives, cooking for soldiers, writing messages of strength on every supply box. The spirit was contagious, and yet every uprising has its cost. Western aid groups began suspending operations, citing security concerns. Foreign investors paused projects. The CFA franc, the currency still tied to France, began to fluctuate. But Traoré had planned for this. Weeks earlier, his economic team had quietly begun diversifying reserves into gold and other African-based assets. He knew this storm was coming. At a cabinet meeting broadcast live, he told his ministers, "Let them take their money, they think we will starve. But Africa's wealth is under our feet, not in their banks." That clip became another viral moment. Africans everywhere repeated his line, "Our wealth is under our feet." It became graffiti on city walls, lyrics in new Afrobeat songs, and captions on millions of reels. But with every surge in popularity came new threats. Reports emerged that drones had been spotted near the Burkina, Ivorian border, surveillance models typically used by Western contractors. Burkina Faso defense units responded by tightening airspace and launching counter-reconnaissance patrols. For the first time in modern African history, a small landlocked nation was challenging global intelligence systems head-on. Behind the scenes, the African public began to sense something deeper. This wasn't just Burkina Faso versus Côte d'Ivoire. It was Africa versus manipulation. As the conflict simmered, African influencers, scholars, and even musicians began to join the conversation. Talk shows discussed how African nations could protect one another from foreign-sponsored instability. Podcasts called it the Traoré Doctrine, the belief that African unity and sovereignty are the only path to lasting peace. The phrase caught fire. Even in the diaspora, African Americans and Caribbeans began quoting Traoré's speeches. For many, he was more than a politician. He was the voice they'd been waiting for, a symbol of rediscovered pride. Western think tanks scrambled to issue reports warning of rising anti-Western sentiment. But they misunderstood the movement entirely. This wasn't about hatred, it was about independence. Traoré didn't call for isolation, he called for equality. He didn't reject cooperation, he rejected control. He wasn't closing doors. He was locking out the thieves who had been walking through Africa's open gates for centuries. Then came the breaking point. An intercepted audio clip, released anonymously online, allegedly captured a conversation between a rebel commander and an Ivorian official. In the recording, the voices discussed continued support and border-safe zones. Though unverified, the clip exploded across social media. Ivory leaks trended in multiple countries. Côte d'Ivoire's government dismissed it as fake, but the damage was done. The people believed Traoré. For every denial issued from Abidjan, 10 new memes, videos, and songs appeared from Burkina Faso. The culture war had begun, and Africa's youth were on Traoré's side. Soon after, neighboring countries started shifting their tone. Niger, Mali, and Guinea expressed solidarity with Burkina Faso in the defense of sovereignty. The dream of an independent West African bloc was taking form, slowly, dangerously, irreversibly. In a viral street interview, a young student from Bamako said, "When one African leader stands up, he stands for all of us. If they touch Burkina, they touch Africa." The video hit 10 million views in 3 days. The energy was electric. And yet the more Africa united, the louder Western pressure grew. Economic sanctions were whispered. Aid packages were reevaluated. Old tactics resurfaced, but they no longer worked like before. Burkina Faso was no longer afraid of being isolated. It had something more powerful than money, it had the people. In the following weeks, Traoré announced the formation of a regional investigative committee to uncover the entire rebel funding network, including corporate and government actors. It was a direct challenge to everything the old order had built. Foreign officials called it provocative, but to millions of Africans, it was justice. The press conference that followed was the most viewed event in Burkina Faso's television history. Cameras from around the continent filled the hall. Reporters waited, pens ready, as Traoré walked to the podium in his olive green uniform. He didn't shout, he didn't smile. He simply looked into the cameras and said, "We will not trade our blood for their gold. We will not let neighbors become weapons against each other. We are Africans, and we will write our own future." The hall erupted. That single line became legend overnight. Within 24 hours, the video reached every corner of the internet. People began stitching his clip with scenes of African flags rising, soldiers saluting, farmers tilling the soil. Even artists in the diaspora sampled his words into music tracks. His face appeared on murals in Nairobi, Lagos, and Johannesburg. For the first time in decades, Africa had a rallying cry that was neither imported nor imposed. It was born from within. But Traoré knew the battle wasn't over. He knew power never surrenders quietly. He knew the next move would be retaliation, not through armies, but through propaganda, sanctions, and fear. Still, the message was clear. The walls of deception were cracking. And through those cracks, the light of a new Africa was beginning to shine. As the sun set over Ouagadougou, the city glowed gold under the African sky. Children ran through the streets waving small flags, soldiers stood guard with pride, and for the first time in a long time, the air smelled like hope. The world could ignore them. The media could twist their stories. But the truth, the real truth, was no longer hidden. Burkina Faso had spoken. And this time, the world had listened. Traoré's voice still echoed in the minds of millions. Brothers and sisters, Africa's freedom will not be given. It will be taken, with unity, with courage, and with love for our land. That single sentence became the heartbeat of a generation. From Dakar to Nairobi, from Lagos to Johannesburg, youth shouted it in protests, printed it on shirts, and painted it across walls. A new fire was burning, not of war but of awakening. A new chapter was being written by Africa for Africa. And as the camera slowly pans out, showing the shining skyline of Burkina Faso, a voiceover closes the story. They tried to divide us, they tried to silence us. But from the dust of resistance, a nation rose. Not with hatred, but with vision. And this is only the beginning. If you believe in Africa's awakening, hit that subscribe button right now. Because tomorrow, we'll uncover the stories they don't want you to hear. Stories that prove the world is changing and Africa is leading the way.